All right, so here we're going to talk about GreenAV. How many of you have thought about your company becoming greener or selling green AV systems or starting to think about the opportunities that are available in green? Only a few of you answered. Come on, raise your hands, raise your hands. I may call on you for some examples of things that you're doing, and hopefully some of these will be familiar to you. And I apologize for that noise, but while they're adjusting that, I'll let you watch a video that we made. We do these like weirdly... Hi, this is Gary Kayye, and I'm here not to rant about something, I'm here to rave about something. I'm excited about GreenAV, and I'm excited about the potential that GreenAV brings to our industry as a whole. I'm not some tree-hugging environmentalist. Sure, I love trees. I'm such a fan. I just love everything about it. There's nothing I don't love. But at the same time, I hate trees that drop berries on my car. It drives me nuts. And it always happens like the day after I get my car washed. Berries, berries, berries. You can't just flick the berries off. You're driving in your car, the wind doesn't flick the berries off. All of a sudden the berry's sitting there. You can't get the berry off. You try to take the berry off, and there's a stain where the berry used to be. Can't believe you did this to me. Other than that, I love trees. This is not a rant, this is a rave, so I'm not going to talk about the berries, okay? I'm going to get over that and move on. My point was talk about GreenAV. The original green movement was in the 80s, and it was hard to get behind.
It's all about going green, saving the earth. You're not fat, you're just round like Mother Earth.
And you had all these radicalists telling us that we need to throw out everything that burns gas, and we need to stop using electricity.
You know, one time I was hanging out with my friends, the polar bears, down on the ice caps before they started melting.
The movement that's on right now in our industry, this green movement that has really been sparked by Infocom and their STEP program, is more than just the 80s radical Greenpeace, let's beat up people that want to hurt whales. There's ways that we can, as a group in the AV industry, get behind this and actually make money doing it. First of all, what we can do is support manufacturers that are making green products. And that's a simple thing to do. You see more and more manufacturers talking about how their products are becoming eco-friendly or green. And some of it might be hype, but even the smallest bit of improvement on a product is going to make a big difference. Statistically, 15% electricity will get cut simply by knowing how much electricity you're using. Isn't that right, little guy? I guess he only talks in commercials, but hey, you got my point. And that starts with companies like Biamp and Extron and Crestron and AMX and even NEC and Christie Digital. Those are companies that have all started to have everything from eco modes in their products to actually going and getting their products Energy Star qualified. In the case of the Energy Star qualified ones from Extron, they're actually using less than 1 watt of power when they're actually in standby. So it's a true standby mode. You can even use power strips and power management systems from companies like Surgex and Triplite that are actually capable of turning outlets on and off. So you turn the products off when you're not using them and turn the products back on when you're actually using them. You're going to use less power. So in the end, ultimately what you want to do is be as green as possible. So it's a call to action to all you integrators. Do something.
Let our powers combine. Earth, fire, wind, water.
GreenAV. If you want to learn more about it, you can subscribe to our GreenAV newsletter. We have one actually dedicated to green. You can also take a look at the Infocom STEP program. That program is designed specifically to set up standards, practices, and procedures for our industry to follow to make the greenest systems possible. GreenAV always wins. Versus regular AV, GreenAV is going to win. You just wait and see. It's Gary Kayye, and I'm done raving.
I disagree.
Okay, so there's a whole bunch of like weirdly entertaining.
Thank you for calling emergency information. You have selected Going Green. When faced with the threat of climate change, you may be asking yourself, what can I do? I'm just one person who owns a corporation and an oil field and a power plant. Just remember the 3 R's. Reduce. Flex your power by turning off wasteful appliances. Soon, everyone will be saving electricity, whether they like it or not. Next, reuse. Reuse that barrel of oil by selling and reselling it on the energy futures market. By the time it gets to the gas pump, it will be too expensive for people to actually buy. Public transportation is looking better already. This brings us to the third R, recycling. By gouging prices, you'll have driven people to recycle everything just to make up for the higher cost of fuel. So remember, stick to the 3 R's and you'll be looking at a much greener environment already.
All right. So let's try to get a little serious here. So I'm going to talk to you about 2 different ways that we can sort of bring our companies to be green. One way you have control over, and the other way you probably have very little control over. The inside you probably have very little control over, but I'm still going to mention some of the ways that you can participate in the GreenAV movement and also use it as a marketing tool in addition to doing good things for the environment and supporting sustainability. Now, the inside requires sort of a philosophical change within your organization, whereas the outside is really within your control in most cases. Unless you're the owner of the company, unless you're in charge of the GreenAV initiative in your organization, then the outside is where you have control. The outside is the interface with the customer. It's the manufacturers that you're supporting and the products that you're specifying and the systems that you're designing. The Infocom STEP program addresses both sides of this, and you're going to see them come out with future versions of STEP that will address specifically a rating system to make you to decide whether you're green or not based on how much inside and outside that you're doing. So let's talk about some inside things that we're doing. All right, how many of you are actually doing the 3 R's? How many of you have a recycling program in your organization in place right now? How many of you have bins that have trash cans and recycling next to them? I mean, even that basic thing is one small thing that will make a difference. And everybody can participate in that. Unfortunately, about half of you raised your hand. How many of you are controlling power consumption? Now, in the state of California, it's required by law, but it's not required by law in virtually any other state. So how many of you actually have automated light switches, for example, in the bathrooms in your organization? So when people are not in the bathrooms and the restrooms, that's a simple way that you can, and you know, interestingly enough, there's a company in our industry that makes this kind of stuff, so you can also get it at a great discount. How many of you have a carpooling program that supports sustainability? How many of you get rewarded for carpooling? Or how many of you get rewarded for not coming in the office and have a system design where you're able to telecommute into the office? Raise your hand. Only a few. That's an easy one, because ironically, we're selling the technology that we're telling people helps them communicate all the time and stay connected all the time, and we find ourselves still forcing our employees to come into the office all the time and check in a face-to-face manner when in reality there's a huge movement towards communications and other mediums. I mean, today at 11 o'clock, the biggest company that's forced communications through a new medium, Facebook, is going public, and that's a whole different way of communicating, and that will trickle up over time as well. How many of you have an education program about green? This is important because, interestingly enough, they have found that statistically, if you take a look at companies that are in sort of the sustainability movement, what they found is that when they've talked to organizations, whether it be manufacturers, dealers, or even outside of our industry, just sort of consumer companies as well, if you're educated on how much energy you're using, typically, statistically, you reduce your energy usage by 15%. So just by being armed with the knowledge of how much energy you're using can help you reduce the energy consumption. And statistically, it's 15%. So that's pretty substantial. So you can have a 15% reduction. Now, how can you do that? Well, using digital signage. Some of you, I assume, have heard of digital signage. You can actually use displays to tell your organization and people in your organization how much energy you're using. And if people see a meter moving, then they're going to be interested in trying to get that meter to slow down, and therefore you're going to save energy by doing stuff like that. And then that means turning lights off at night and having systems for managing that and making it as automated as possible, but everybody has to participate. And of course, changing your lighting to LED lighting. The problem with LED in the past has been that the color temperature of the LED has not been real conducive for replacing lights like can lights. But now, of course, thanks to Cree, we have all different color temperatures of light. So how do we go deeper inside? This again, some of this may not be within your control. Like, you may not have any control over whether or not you have recycling bins everywhere outside your company. I mean, Christie Digital and Daylight, for example, they not only have recycling bins everywhere, but they have compost bins everywhere. So when you're eating your lunch, you're dividing the waste of your lunch into 3 containers, not 2 containers. That's why those 2 manufacturers won Infocom's GreenAV award 2 years in a row. So are your vendors green? So are you using Christie and Dela? Are you supporting companies that are supporting sustainability in the industry, or supporting this green movement? Even down to the level of your coffee company. Where's your coffee company getting their coffee from? That may not seem like a big deal to you, but of course there are a lot of people interested in sort of supporting and sustaining countries, and there's a lot of, I don't want to get into the political sides of it, but you should care about this kind of stuff. Your copier company. I mean, interestingly enough, 10 years ago we were talking about the paperless office, and now more paper is being used in copiers and printers than ever before. So we're not moving more towards a paperless office or as quickly as we wanted to. And then ISO 14001, are you supporting manufacturers and vendors that are supporting the ISO 14001 standard? And are you, in fact, using GreenAV gear in your own organization? How many of you have racks that stay on all the time? Let's be honest here. How many of you have racks that everybody's shaking their head but afraid to raise their hand? So that's something that should be addressed as well. All right, so all things being equal, the greener AV system will win. Now, what do I mean by this? Okay, so what I simply mean by this is, if you're in a bid situation where Company A has a system, it's almost identical to Company B's, or is price supportive, or could be in the same budgetary range that each of the two systems are in that the client wants them in. If Company A is promoting theirs as green and explaining why they promote theirs as green, and Company B is not, Company A is going to win most of the time. So all things being equal, the greener AV system wins. So if you can do some of these things that we're going to go over today, and you can actually implement those, especially the outside ones, the ones that you have control over, then what you're going to do is create a situation where you can use that as a marketing advantage and ultimately a sales advantage to your organization. Now, I'm going to use an analogy to this that is mainstream to help you understand or to help you articulate this point. The biggest now I teach at the University of North Carolina Journalism School, and I teach students at UNC who are mostly juniors, seniors, and grad students on social media marketing. That's sort of my expertise there. One of the most, all of the students that go through journalism school who are advertising majors study the biggest failed ad campaign in the history of the United States. Anybody know what it is? Most money ever spent in an ad campaign that failed. Anybody have any idea what it was? What was it? No, it wasn't New Coke? Because New Coke, what happened with New Coke was, although the product failed, tremendous exposure, and bad exposure is still giant exposure. Who said the Edsel? No, not enough money. Not enough money. We're not talking soon enough. Well, I'll give you an example. I'll put it to you this way. If they would have had this, that campaign wouldn't have failed. Instead, what they did is, because they didn't have this type of an advertising campaign, then what they did was they made it a law. Ticket. What's the difference? An emotional connection to the entertainment that you have there. You have an emotional connection to it, so you feel tied to it. You're like affected by it emotionally. I mean, that brings sort of like this emotion, especially if you have kids and or you know people that have been killed in car accidents. That has an impact on you. So what I'm going to try to do is give you an emotional connection to why you should support
Kermit
GreenAV
the Frog
technology.
here. And today I'd like to tell you a little bit about the color green. Do you know what's green?
All right, so my reason for wanting people to go green and
You see,
sustainability
frogs
are
are
also
green
selfish. Because I want my kids to be left with a better place than what we have
green,
today.
you see?
So, what is your personal impact?
It's
how does this
not
affect
that
you? How does it
easy
affect your family?
being
How does it affect the
green.
future of our country and the future of our
Having to spend
opportunities?
each day
So what we're going to end
the
up
color.
happening is we're going to end up forced into a situation where it's going to become a law if we don't do something about it. And we're already seeing that in some places, right? We're being forced to recycle in some communities, which is unfortunate because it should be sort of an adoptive process and everybody want to do better for the environment. But in reality, I don't want to get into a political argument over it, because there's certainly values. I think everybody would agree, but also at the same time, we don't want to be inconvenienced by this movement. So let's go back to the GreenAV movement and what you have control over, and that's the outside side of things. So the very first thing that you need to do is identify GreenAV manufacturers. The second thing you need to do is simplify and integrate GreenAV gear. All right, so the more gear you put in that's not being used, the more power it's using, the more waste that you ultimately have. So therefore, what's going to ultimately happen is one day somebody's going to actually ask you to quantify exactly what this equipment's doing and how much it's using, whether it be power or resources or whatever, and you're going to have the ability to actually do that. So this is going to be important for you to sort of follow this movement. Now, there are some things going on in the industry that will make this easier for you to follow this. And then controlling it. The only way to truly make a system completely sustainable is through a really good control system. That doesn't mean a sophisticated control system. It doesn't mean an overbloated control system. It means a control system that has the ability to do some natural things that simplify a system. And simplification is ultimately the key to this, because if we're only putting in the gear that we're actually going to use and we're only having it used and on and actually powered when we're actually using it, that's a key factor. So let's talk about a how-to to get all this stuff done. So all things being equal, the greener AV system is gonna win. Now, Infocom started the STEP program, I don't know, a couple of years ago. It started getting some exposure out there. And actually, the director of Infocom's sustainability efforts, Almo, Weidman, is actually here, and he's raising his hand there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call on him if you have a question during this presentation that I can't answer because he can answer it. Now, Infocom has taken the initiative to help our industry and has actually created a standard. And I don't want to compare it to ISO 9000, but I guess that's an easy analogy to understand. But it's sort of a way of setting up a set of standards, practices, and procedures to make systems greener or more sustainable than they already are. And it's called the STEP process. And there's going to be multiple steps of STEP, interestingly enough. And there's multiple directions that STEP is going to move in the future. Alan even just told me about something new that they're going to be doing sometime later this year with manufacturers. So the STEP process has multiple phases to it. And I'm not going to go through every step within each phase. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to point out a couple of things that need to become obvious to you. So these are the steps in the planning phase. So this is like, the planning phase would be like, okay, we're as an organization going to get together and decide we're going to do this. So this is the phase that we all decide we're going to do this. And that includes documenting everything, figuring out how we're going to go to a paperless process. Now, why would we go to a paperless process? Think about how many times you're printing system diagrams over and over and over again every time there's a modification to a system. Whereas if you kept it all electronic and everybody had access to the same level of documents, then everybody would have the latest revision of that documentation, and therefore they would have access to what is in the system, and therefore the system documentation would live forever and ever in its real-time form, as opposed to whatever's in print. And of course, print wastes not only is wasteful to the environment, but requires energy to do so. We're going to have a plan to use reclaimed gear. And that doesn't mean just gear that you're putting in customer sites or pulling out of customer sites, but also gear that you're using now. Like, how many of you have a program for what to do with all the computers every time you buy new computers in your organization? That's unfortunately, a couple of people raised their hand. What does that mean the rest of you guys? Did you throw them away? Because if you throw them away, there's 8-year-old kids in China pulling solder out of those things as you get rid of those things. I mean, that's where they get sent. You could Google this. You'd be shocked at what's going on. And then adding an intelligent building technologies manager, integrated building technology, or smart building technologies manager. This is a key factor, because if your organization is really going to become and take a stand that we are actually going to become a GreenAV integration company integrating GreenAV systems, we're going to have somebody who's the evangelist for that. That doesn't mean you have to hire somebody who's going to do this full time. It's sort of like that one person that you can go to anytime you have a question on an AMX control system. You know, there's that one guy or one lady at the company that anytime I have a question about AMX, I know I can go to that one person. They can answer every question that I'm ever going to have because they know the product's inside and out. That's that person. You're going to need to have an evangelist for IBT who's going to basically take hold of this step process and help you move into it. Because what we want to do ultimately, and the way we're going to have the most impact and be most profitable as a group of integrators, is going to be being involved in the systems design as early as possible in the process. And this gives us the ability to do that. We've always wanted to get involved in the systems design before the building was actually built. We're always brought in after the building's built and asked to retrofit something or come up with an AV system, but we didn't have any control over what was done while the building was actually under construction. Well, this gives us the ability to do that and a reason to go to the architects and the building contractors and say, we should be involved because we have somebody who's certified to actually pull this kind of stuff off. So that IBT person, and IBT, I use the term IBT because that's what the construction industry uses, and they use the term integrated building technologies, also known as intelligent and smart building technologies. There's all different names for it. I think Infocom's STEP program mostly refers to it as intelligent or smart building technology. It's the same thing. It's that one person that you're going to be able to go to in your organization. And you're going to find that this person appears in every phase of the STEP process.
Are you doing any of this in cooperation with Bixby?
Okay, yes, Infocom is in fact doing this in cooperation with Bixby, and I would recommend that you talk to Alan afterwards and he can fill you in on all that. We actually talked about the STEP affiliation with Bixby this morning when Alan and I spoke. Yep, absolutely. I mean, it's all being done together because there's no reason to have two different separate standards out there. Yes, so they're working together on it. So the next phase is the architectural design phase. This is the phase where you've gone out and you spec the system for the customer, and now you're actually coming back and designing the system. So we're doing the same thing that we do, but in addition to all the stuff we currently do to design a system, we have to start doing, oops, what did I do? I went past that. Ultimately, I wanted you to see that IBT manager was there as well. The next step is the actual design phase. The IBT person is there again. And again, this person, every step along the way, you'll find that some of these things appear again and again and again, meaning the same process. You're double checking the fact that you still have electronic documentation. You're still not printing anything because there's no need to print anything yet. We still have a program for reclaiming AV gear and what we're going to do with it again. Interestingly enough, there are two companies, one in Chicago and one in New Jersey, they exist only to reclaim electronics equipment. All right, so there are two companies that I know of, personally know of in the United States. There's one based in Chicago, one based in New Jersey, and all they do is you can contract with them. It won't cost you anything. They'll come and take all of the AV equipment that you pull out of a system, and of course they're going to ultimately take it apart and sell it, so they get something for it as well. It will cost you if you want them to deinstall it, but it won't cost you if you've already staged it somewhere. And all this information, by the way, is on our website. So if you go to ravepubs.com/greenav, everything that you're seeing here is on our website, in addition to links to all the information that I'm talking about here, in addition to the actual STEP documentation is linked there from our website as well. So all this stuff is there, and links to those manufacturers I just talked about, who are those companies that will come in and take your reclaimed AV gear. So then we have the installation phase or integration phase. Again, that IBT person is there again. That's the key person that sort of pulls the system together and makes sure that you're staying within the STEP guidelines. And then the operations phase is to get it working. How many of you employ video teleconferencing for training rather than sending people out to the site itself for training? That's great. There's about 6 of you who are doing that. I mean, isn't that a good idea? I mean, who would have thought that we'd use the technology that we're selling? I mean, this is yet another reason to get the customer to buy this stuff, because you're saying, not only am I going to train you this way, but you'll be able to use the system this way, but also I'll be able to support the system this way. So here's why you should buy video conferencing. And of course, if they don't want to buy video conferencing, tell them to use Skype. Do it via Skype. There are other ways to do it than driving out there every time that you have a question about. So how many of you have thought about integrating digital signage as a communications medium for your customers? How many of you have suggested to your own clients, let me put digital signs all over your company that tell you energy usage. So I can connect that to your power system and I can tell you how much energy you're using. Why would you do that? Because you can say to them, by letting me put this digital signage system in that's going to tell you how much energy you're using, statistically, you're going to save 15% of your energy usage, and you'll be able to use that digital signage network for a bunch of other stuff too. So this is another way to sell digital signage into a system as well, in addition to all the other ways and the advertising opportunities that are there. And then the review. So in our case, Infocom is really the organization that's sort of driving this. They are the industry association. How many of you go to the Infocom show annually, the trade show? About a third of you. Well, that show's in Vegas here in about a month. Alan will be there, and they'll be talking about stuff. There'll be lots of meetings about this because this is a work in process. Currently, there are 10 pilot projects, am I right, Alan? 10 pilot projects running right now where they're using the step process they're using 10 pilot projects to model the step process and make sure that it works and get all the kinks out of it before they publish it and make it an industry standard. Because this obviously is a very sophisticated, highly integrated system. This is not just an, oh, by the way, we're going to add step to our organization. This is something that's going to take your organization a while to integrate. But until you do that, the rest of this session is going to talk about things that you can do today, starting tomorrow or Monday when you go back to the office. And you can take advantage of your ability to promote and market yourself as a green company. So that's another factor too, is if you aren't doing green, or if you are doing green, you need to be able to market the fact that you're doing green. So you also have to have some level of marketing capability as well. In the meantime, I want you to remember that all things being equal, the greener AV system will win. So I want you to think about all these little small details I'm going to go over and how important they are to be able to promote a system as being green. It may not be 100% green. It may not even be 15% green. But the greener of the two systems, all things being equal, is going to win. All right, so how do you go green? Well, the first thing is to understand that control is the key. And again, as I said to you earlier today, you don't have to put in an extremely expensive, overly complicated control system to actually make that happen. For example, the more networked gear you put in, the more control you have over that network gear, therefore, the more green you can make a system. So how many of you are integrating IT-enabled AV products as much as you possibly can? So the nice thing about those products is you have the ability to control them outside of a control system. So you have the ability to just across a network, without a sophisticated AMX, Crestron, or whoever control system that you're using, control those individual products using all sorts of free software tools that are online and available to you, or even on your iPhone or your Android. So I think 4 years ago when I came here to Washington, did this keynoted when this was electrograph before, or whatever that whole thing happened. I did a keynote where I talked about how important control was going to be in the future of the AV universe, and I said that back then that control is going to be the key to the future of our existence. And I know a lot of you have sort of moved that direction where you should design systems based on how you're going to control them first and then fill out all the other AV equipment afterwards. And this is an easy way to do that. And all the major control manufacturers are doing that. So auto on and off, time management. Let me talk about auto on and off. Let me talk about a little simple way of doing auto on and off. So at the University of North Carolina, because I have some influence there because our company is located in Chapel Hill actually, we helped them with sort of re-engineering their AV system about 3 years ago campus-wide. I think I talked to you about that a year and a half ago when I was here and I did the digital signage keynote for Almo, and I talked about how we were putting in 150, helping them with this 150 sign digital signage network, which is finally being integrated. Well, individually, we have some influence over some of those departments, and we've been asked our opinion on things. And I can tell you that, for example, some of the logical things, some of the things that happen logically, like in the journalism school, are things that you would have control over. For example, classrooms generally aren't being used after hours. Students may come in and turn those equipment on if they have a permission to go in there, or they have keys to those classrooms. They come in and turn those systems on. But generally, they're being used when normal class time is on. So say 8 to 8:50 Monday through Friday, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the class would be 8 to say 9:15. So in that case, we have the ability to schedule those classrooms for the whole entire semester, because the same class is going to stay in the same room all semester for each day it's being used, and actually have the ability to turn the equipment on and off that the professor is actually going to use, so that it's all pre-set up for him or her, and not all the other gear is turned on for no reason whatsoever. Now, they still have the ability to turn on the gear if they decide to use the document camera the one time in a semester they may use it, but it's not already on, wasting energy. So you can't do that without a control system, right? Or you can't do that without the ability to control that equipment one way or another. So the simplest way to do this is through a control system. And again, that's not that sophisticated. Most of these manufacturers have very simple systems that are really sort of template-based to control on-off functions and usage when they're primarily going to be used, and even lighting and sound and detecting when a room is being used versus not being used, and so on and so forth. I mean, you can use, like, even all the rooms at the University of North Carolina have little cameras now that tell them, you know, where the IT department, because that's who's running AV now, can actually see whether somebody's in a room or not, in case that room is being used and they don't realize it's being used, meaning it's not during a normally scheduled time, and they can shut off that room manually if they need to. And it doesn't cost. That's not a $500 security camera. That's a $15 or $20 webcam that you can use nowadays, because most of those have web servers built into them. So the ability to manage all this, time management, scheduling, use management. Use management is great because it helps you determine what products should be turned on. I mean, how often do they actually use a document camera? Is it something that should be on that often? Is it even something that should be spec'd in the system at all? That's the kind of stuff you get from use management. And all this means more service sales and not small margin product sales, because this is all support-based stuff. This is all not selling more gear. This is all supporting it proactively rather than reactively. So you're managing the system for them, for whether it be a campus or a corporation or even a small conference room. You have the ability to manage this because you're doing it through the control system. So and the second thing, as I mentioned earlier, is integrate IP-enabled AV gear. This is important because, now, interestingly enough, the first networked AV product that ever came out, anybody know what that was, by the way? Anybody remember what that was? I'll give you a hint. It was a projector. I'll give you a second hint. It was made by Sony. Man, nobody remembers the FX50? That was the first product, an AV product that ever had a network port on. Everybody was like, well, what do we do with that? I mean, like, what's the point of having a network port on a projector now? Well, now it's obvious what we can do with that, because now we have the ability to control a product multiple ways as opposed to being required to use a control system by, say, AMX or Crestron through RS-232. We have the ability to control that across a network and connect it to all the other network integrated gear that we have on campus, whether it be printers or whether it be computers or whatever else, digital signage networks, whatever they might be. So specifying GreenAV gear. How many of you actually take the time when you're specifying systems, or when you're selling systems for that matter, to spec or recommend a product that is green over a product that's not necessarily green? How many of you have thought about that? Has anybody thought about that? Because there are some standards out there. For example, there are standards that work in the consumer industry that actually translate to the professional world. For example, there was a standard written by the EPA, which is the group that manages sort of green AV standards, where they said all consumer amplifiers, when in the standby mode, have to consume less than 1 watt of power. Now, why do they need any power at all? Anybody have any idea why an amplifier, like those AV switchers that switch your inputs to your TV, why do they need to have any power at off when they're off? Why do they need to have any power at all when they're off? So it can come back on. So you don't have to go and press the front of it to turn it back on. So that you can turn it back on through some control mechanism. So something's got to be active there, right? So they say, well, we're not going to make it where you have to have it totally off, but you have to have be consuming less than 1 watt of power. Now, interestingly enough, what they found was when they studied all these amplifiers, and then the reason why they started with amplifiers was pretty easy. Believe it or not, the average at that time amplifier was drawing 30 watts of power when it was off, meaning when it was in the standby mode. So that's a huge amount of wasted energy when you think about how often your TV is being watched versus it's not being watched. I mean, most people don't have their TV on more than half the day. Most people have it on maybe 4 or 5 hours in a day at most. So that means the other 18, 19 hours a day it was consuming a lot of power that it didn't need to consume. So they set a standard for that. Now there's a standard for consumer televisions as well that's very similar to that. So when it's off, you have to consume less than 1 watt of power. All right, they are moving towards doing projectors, but that's going to be a little way off. But they're obviously focused on consumer gear. But what's happened is manufacturers in the ProAV market have adopted those same sorts of standards. So Biamp, Extron, Crestron, AMX, they're all using that same amplifier standard for their own audio amplifiers. So you'll see that they have a line of products. Each one of them have a line of products that are EPA, Energy Star qualified products. That's the term, Energy Star qualified, or don't, meaning they don't say anything about it. So those that have an Energy Star qualification means that they're consuming less than 1 watt of power in standby. Now that's interesting because I'll give you another little statistic, and I won't say the manufacturer, but a major audio manufacturer, who all of you I'm sure have used at one time or another, their amplifier, which was a very popular 2-watt amplifier used in tons and tons of educational systems over the years, would generate 70 watts of power in standby up until this year. So until they shipped the new version of the product this year, it was actually consuming 70 watts of power when in standby. That's a tremendous amount of power. So you multiply that times 25 classrooms, or even 100 classrooms across the campus. You're using it, and that's only one piece of gear. That's not everything in the system. So specifying GreenAV gear. So amplifiers that really go into standby. You've even seen consumer products. How many of you use DirecTV? How many of you are DirecTV subscribers? Have you noticed the new thing that they started activating on the DirecTV receivers? I mean, DVRs are like the worst, in my opinion, right now. I mean, because you know that they're generating some power because you go into your closet, wherever it's held, and you put your hand on top of it, and you can basically fry an egg on some of those. So they are now putting those in standby if a TV's not being used for more than 4 hours, and they'll actually shut it off and wait for you to turn it back on. So amplifiers that actually go into standby, LCDs that are LED lit and have an eco mode. Now that goes for both projectors and monitors now, because there are projectors, there's LCD projectors that have eco mode, and there's projectors that don't have an eco mode. Now you may think, well, that's marketing. Well, it may be marketing, but in fact, even doing something is doing better than doing nothing. And what does eco mode actually do? What it does is it turns down the amount of power that's being generated from the lamp. So you get a dimmer picture. But in a lot of environments, you don't need a brighter picture, meaning you put in a 3,000 amp lumen projector in a room that they're dimming the lights anyway, you can run it at half that power. And then therefore the projector is going to last twice as long. Therefore you're going to use less mercury-based lamps, and therefore you're going to use less power to power the projector because we're going to use half the power to actually power the lamp. Or not, no, it's about 40% less. So projectors that have an eco mode or LED. Now you're going to see a big movement in LED. Over the next 2 years, you're going to see LED brightness. The brightest LED-based projector with the basic LED technology that you know right now is about 350 anti-lumens. Okay, there are brighter ones that are out there that use multiple arrays of LEDs, but they're very expensive and have other little issues associated with them. But over the course of the next year and a half, you're going to see projectors in the 2,000 to 3,000 anti-lumens range coming from LEDs, thanks to new technology, primarily from a company based in North Carolina called Cree, who happens to own the patent on the blue LED, which is driving sort of the LED production capabilities that are out there. So you're going to see a lot of that. And then control via energy monitoring. So not just picking the individual gear, but also picking gear that can be controlled. So you may be faced with a situation where you can't pick a greener AV gear. Like there may be a product that you want to use that there is no green equivalent of it. I mean, there's no manufacturer that's building a greener version. Or you may be a manufacturer that doesn't make any sense for them to have it be green. Well, if it has the ability for it to be controlled, then we can add energy monitoring to it, so therefore we can turn a product that isn't green into a green AV product. Does that make sense to everybody? All right, so there's really two sides of this. There's specifying green gear and also specifying products that can be controlled so that we can do energy monitoring and make sure that we're making it go green. Energy Star compliant gear. How many of you are using power conditioners that have control? Meaning there's lots of levels of power conditioning. How many of you have thought about power conditioners and power strips, even that level of product for control? Because now you can actually specify not only power conditioners but also power strips where you can turn off individual outlets one by one. So that's an IP-enabled power strip. You may think, why? Actually, there's one downstairs. Trip light downstairs that will show you They have one that has like 30 outlets, 60 outlets, and so on and so forth, where you control every single outlet via IP. So across the network, you can turn on each individual outlet. And you might think, why would I want to do that? Well, there's why you'd want to do it. So you have the ability to control a piece of gear that normally would not be green because it has no ability to shut itself off or is consuming power even when it's not being used. So the idea of shutting off a rack, you're able to shut, instead of shutting off the entire rack and turning everything off, because we do need the camera monitoring the room, for example, we shut off only the equipment that's not being used and keep the equipment that's being used still on. Screens. How many of you are specifying screens with GreenGuard, or screens that have, I mean, daylight? Did you know that daylight was actually, as I mentioned earlier today, won Infocom's GreenAV award the second year they did it, last year, and it's because of their use of GreenGuard technology in their screens. So they're making screens that are using less harmful elements, more sustainable, in addition to sustaining the environment with the practices that they're using inside the organization as well. So they're sort of double green because they're building products that are greener, but they're also practicing inside green as well. How many of you have thought about relamping with eco-friendly lamps rather than the lamps that are being used out there now? Because there are different levels of lamp technology that exist now. When the projector came out 5 years ago, with its original lamps, you didn't have a choice. But now you have the ability to actually select lamps that are actually eco-friendly lamps or have some less mercury or no mercury in them. For example, Casio is another company that's won a number of awards recently because they have lead-free, mercury-free lamp technology. Of course, that is not a patented thing. That's something that you're going to see emulated by a number of manufacturers over the next couple of years as well. And then go wireless. I mean, obviously, using less wire, using less cable as much as possible is going to make a greener system. So by the mere fact that you're using control and less cable, you can say your system is greener than your competitor's system. So again, every little part matters because, again, all things being equal, the greener AV system is going to win. So integrate digital signage systems into everything. That, as a byproduct, can be made. That is something that you can say makes your system greener by the fact that you're providing information on how much energy usage they're using compared to how much they wouldn't even know that information. Again, statistically, 15% reduction in power. That's huge when you're talking about a big facility. And give people information. Let them know. Give them the option. I can guarantee you, if you bid a system that's not green, they won't buy a GreenAV system from you because they won't know it exists. So if you tell them that there's a green option to this, they might buy it from you. So you could even bid something two ways. You could feel out the customer and say, hey, I want to see how green you are, how much green I can get away with here. Because I'm going to bid you one system that's green and one system that's not green. And then it puts them in the driver's seat of deciding whether they want to support GreenAV or sustainability or not. In some cases, they have to, and I'll talk about that now, like, for example, the government. So there's really three main GreenAV markets right now, the green markets for green technology. All right, in the case of the government, that's an interesting one because the government already has procedures in place to require everything to be green. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to like switch everything out because obviously there's a limit to what they can spend right now. Although the additional $11.2 billion that was added to the budget recently includes green initiatives specifically outlined in there. So to do business with the government in certain divisions of the government, depending on where you are right now in the process, you may find that they're going to actually ask for green technology in those systems. So the government's sort of an easy one because in that case, there's an initiative from the top down to say that we're going to become more green, we're going to become more recyclable, we're going to become more sustainable to the environment. So for those of you who are doing government business, you're probably already seeing some of that now and probably already have run up against some of the initiatives. So if you're not in the position, if you're doing government work and you're not in the position to offer green as an option, then you're well positioned not to sell to the government because you're going to find that in the future, pretty much everything that they ask for is going to have some level of green initiative tied to it. All right, so specifically, they want you to, specifically they're outlining, as far as their documentation goes, they want increased energy efficiency. They want ability to measure that. So they want some ability to be able to prove that this is actually greener than it would have been the way that they're using it now or the way that you would have suspected before. They're also favoring, maybe is a better word than fostering, favoring markets where sustainable technology products and services are being used. We've seen that already. In some cases not so great, but in most cases for really good purposes. And incorporate changes in the supply chain activities, for example, going paperless. I mean, small things like that helps the government become more green. So they're doing it as well. All right, so their standards include products. Okay, so it's not just, obviously, they're not focused on AV. We're focused on AV. So when we sell AV to them, we have to be focused on what products are going to be green and sustainable for them. Energy management, efficiency, measurable, reportable, and best practices. That means like they're going to do the same things that you would do logically inside your organization, like change all the light switches to be motion sensitive so that when somebody's not in a room, the lights turn off and so on and so forth. And then energy efficient electronics or electronics from environmentally conscious manufacturers. So they're going to specify products that are green. Why do you think Apple went to this whole green movement of all their products? I mean, don't you think there was some marketing behind that? Don't you think there was some, don't you think that they were also thinking, okay, well, we sell to education, we sell to government, we see this as an opportunity, because public schools are part of the government, by the way. We see this as an opportunity for us to have a foot up in the door, or foot in the door sooner than anybody else. And of course, sustainable buildings. In the case of corporate, it's a little different, because in the case of corporate, you're going to have somewhat top down, but you're also going to have a lot of influence from the side as well. And so you have two situations. You have one situation where somebody actually cares to be more sustainable about the environment. And then you have the other situation where somebody wants to be able to use it as a marketing tool for their organization. So the company itself can market themselves as being green because they've done all these things. Well, one of those things would be to buy GreenAV stuff, in addition to buying everything else as green as possible. So in that case, you're dealing with two different sort of competing elements, but also elements that can be in synergy with each other. So you have the person who really wants the sustainability and wants the green, wants to save the environment, the tree-hugging, Greenpeace type of person, right? I mean, that's sort of an out there joke. But then you also, on the other side, have the person who is wanting to use it as a marketing advantage or a PR thing, or also a customer value proposition thing, where they say we are greener than our competition out there. And there are standards that exist for that. I mean, ISO and ANSI both have standards for organizations and even buildings. There's a building standard, as you're probably aware of. LEED is one of them that's out there for being green. And by the way, I should mention as well that evangelist person that I recommend that you have within your organization, I would recommend that even if you don't like LEED, because you either love LEED or you hate LEED, for most people that are familiar with LEED, because sometimes the goals of that are unattainable by our industry, for example. That person who's the evangelist for IBT technologies or integrated building technologies can also be the evangelist for LEED, or can be the person who knows and understands what LEED is all about. So that when you go to a meeting with a customer, you can bring in that person and say, this is our integrated buildings technology expert, and he or she is also an expert at LEED. They don't have to be LEED certified to be an expert at LEED, by the way. So at least they know what LEED is and understand how to talk about it, so that when they go into a meeting, again, it gives you an up over your competition by the fact that you have somebody who's addressing sustainability versus your competition that has nothing. So companies are doing things like allowing their employees to telecommute. In fact, IBM is the U.S. leader in that. 65% of their employees telecommute. 65% of IBM in the United States, 65% of their employees, and you think about how many people they employ. I actually don't know the number personally myself, but I know it's in the hundreds of thousands, actually telecommute, meaning they don't actually come to the office on a daily basis. IBM's certainly been one of the leading companies of this. And then, of course, adopting the sustainability standards. And then it is a PR opportunity. I mean, let's be honest, there is an opportunity. And we see more manufacturers marketing that opportunity, for everybody from car manufacturers to home appliance manufacturers to chemical manufacturers, promoting the fact that their products are more sustainable for the environment or green or whatever. And although some of those may appear as exaggerations, again, if you're doing something, that's better than doing nothing. And again, in case of education, in the case of education, if it's a public institution, they're going to be driven by the government. So 75% of all education in the United States, whether it be K through 12 or higher education, is publicly owned, which is going to be driven sort of top down. So as the government as a whole moves towards green and sustainability, then they will be forced to do the same thing. The other 25% will do it because it's good for the environment, and it also teaches lessons to the kids and so on and so forth. And we're also seeing technology adoption helping in that in a great way. This year, I'm going to toot the horn of the University of North Carolina. They are part of a pilot project nationally where they are going to offer, they have told the professors starting this fall that they can't offer a textbook that isn't available in an ebook format as well. So therefore, any book that's specified for a book to be read, if it's not available in an ebook form, they can't specify that. They can make parts of it available in PDF and other forms like that. But then if it's a book that isn't available in ebook form, it has to be available in the library and they need to have access to it. So that's kind of interesting, and you're going to see more schools do that. And of course, that's being helped by companies like Samsung and Apple who are driving the ebook, and Amazon who are driving sort of this movement towards ebook technology and online learning and so on and so forth. By the way, here's another little statistic. Who can tell me what university has graduated more people, more humans than any other university in the United States? University of Phoenix. What's unique about University of Phoenix? Online. They're primarily online. So 2.5 years ago, they passed the Ohio State University as having graduated more humans in the United States than any other university. So they are now, more people are walking around the United States with degrees from University of Phoenix than any other school in the United States. So now, you fast forward 10 years from now. Still think the University of Phoenix is going to be a joke? You're going to be working for somebody that's from the University of Phoenix, most likely. So what's going to ultimately happen is this movement towards this online learning process and e-learning and e-books and sustainability. I mean, they're proving that it can be done. So the brick and mortar organizations are going to, universities, for example, are going to have a hard time competing with that when the majority of the population has been educated that way. So what can you do? Purchase green products or gear from AV manufacturers with green business practices, sort of a review. Consider ISO 14001, 14066 as standards for your organization. I mean, you can actually get your organization. You can go through the process, which basically, that just means you have documentation for everything that you do and that you're documenting exactly how you're following those procedures. And then third, use energy management software solutions, control systems, and implement end-of-life cycle plans. I would highly recommend that Monday you go back and do at least one of these things. I mean, this is real simple. You can go back and start specifying GreenAV gear. It's very easy to find the GreenAV gear. Go to any manufacturer site and type in green, and their search, and you'll find something from virtually every manufacturer. Not every manufacturer, but as I said, virtually every manufacturer. Even Chief with mounts, they have a green program, and they have a set of products that are specifically aimed towards green AV technology or buying green. I mean, you think, well, how would a mount manufacturer deal with that? You'd be surprised. All the different things that they can do to make themselves green. Of course, virtually all the projector manufacturers, electronic switching and distribution manufacturers also have green AV products. They have process in place to maybe make all their products green, but that's going to take a while. Or even if you can't do that, if you feel like, oh, this is overwhelming, I want to stick with the same 30 products I use in every single system, then let's say you implement end-of-life cycle plans. How many of you are going into systems, how many of you go into a system and you don't take anything out? I mean, think about it. Virtually every system you're doing now, there's some sort of AV that's there that you're having to remove. And having implemented a life cycle plan for removing that and making sure that plan is sustainable or supports sustainability is important. And again, we have links on our website. You can contact Infocom. They can tell you who those companies are as well. You can Google them. There are companies out there that specialize in removing that equipment and taking it and then taking it apart and using the stuff that can be used, sort of recycling it or getting rid of the stuff that's bad and making sure that it's not put back in the environment. So green practices implementation. Theoretically, all of us want to do this, right? All of us theoretically want to support GreenAV and sustainability. But in real life, the companies that are doing it are companies like Christie and Daylight, again, both winners of Infocom's GreenAV Award. Middle Atlantic, I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that this is the company that will probably get Infocom's GreenAV Award this year, although they haven't told me and haven't told anybody who is going to get. Maybe Brad knows. Brad, do you know who's getting it this year? What's that? If you did one time, I'm going to bet it's going to be Middle Atlantic, because that company has probably done more than any other company out there recently in the movement towards green that I've seen. And of course, Biamp, Extron, Draper. I mean, there are companies out there that are supporting Crestron and AMX. I mentioned Mid-Atlantic Control Systems. How many of you know who this company is, Mid-Atlantic Control Systems? This is not Middle Atlantic. This is a company that started as an integrator like you. Right? They're called Mid-Atlantic Control Systems, and they're out of New Jersey. And they actually are doing 100% GreenAV systems, and you can contract them to come in and help you convert your organization to supporting GreenAV systems. So that'd be a company that you might want to consider talking to at least. And of course, they charge for that. So there's a lot of companies out there that are supporting GreenAV. There's a company called Arrive. How many of you have heard of Arrive? Arrive is a company that's kind of interesting. They made their appearance at Infocom a couple of years ago, and they are just now starting shipping their product. But they say they have a completely green-based control system and signal routing and distribution system. It'll be interesting to see if they actually do. I haven't actually personally played with it, but I put them on here because they're certainly pushing themselves. ISO 14001, 14066, again, those are standards. Ultimately, they may be required depending on the type of business that you're selling to. Like in the case of a government entity, they may ultimately require certain levels of vendors to them to be required to be ISO certified. It's tough to attain and requires a huge long-term commitment, and so therefore that's why I point out the STEP program at the beginning of this and how that is designed specifically for our industry. STEP is taking an approach, because it's Infocom, they're taking an approach of how can we help our members, integrators, become green and sustainable at the same time. And that's the whole point of that process. And this is the first time Alan's actually been to this session, so I've never had an opportunity to actually introduce him and also recommend that you talk to him. So hopefully Alan will move up here at the end so that you can get his card and or if I probably didn't bring enough cards, did you? I bet you didn't think about bringing that many business cards. But at least he can answer some of the questions that I can't answer. So energy management, software and programming, intelligent smart building technologies, Crestron AMX, obviously we know what they're doing, right? I mean, you know that they have control systems that have the ability to control all this stuff. Energy management, integration, lead. Again, I mentioned that you have somebody on staff that is a evangelist for lead, or at least understands the business practices of lead. And of course, you may have noticed that some of the systems designers in our industry, Scott Walker, for example, out of Atlanta, have become LEED certified. So you're going to see more and more systems designers actually add LEED certification to their business titles as well in their promotion. And of course, STEP, STEP, STEP. I'm a big believer in what Infocom is doing with STEP. And I think that it's got a great future in front of it. And when I started this GreenAV tour with Almo was last fall, we started in New York, and at that point in time, they didn't have any pilot systems. So now, less than 8 months later, they have 10 pilot systems going. So it's exciting to actually see that actually happen. So this is interesting because ultimately, the responsibility for reclaiming equipment is ultimately going to fall on the manufacturer. There's actually a law making its way through Congress right now to require manufacturers to have a program to reclaim electronics. And you've probably heard about this a little bit on the consumer side, where consumer manufacturers are going to be told that they have to take back old TVs, they have to take back old computers. And right now, manufacturers are scrambling to figure out exactly how they would handle that. Like, it's easy for a company like Apple, where they have retail stores. But for a company like Sony that doesn't have retail stores, how would they do that? Well, in the case of Sony, and Samsung and companies like that, NEC, they're working with Best Buy, and Best Buy becomes a drop-off center for that kind of stuff. But in your case, you can make that a marketing advantage of your organization, the fact that you're going to handle that for them. And of course, you can come up with your own program, or you can use those companies I mentioned to. GER eCycling is one of the companies. That's the company located in New Jersey that I mentioned, GER eCycling. And then how many of you donate old AV equipment? How many of you have thought about donating? I mean, in our case, it's easy for us because we don't have that much equipment that we turn over on an annual basis, but we do replace computers quite frequently, and we donate all of our stuff to my kids' schools. So, and sometimes it's stuff that they don't actually need, so we don't give it to them, or it's not something that may be so old that it's not really worth giving to them. But in most cases, it's computers that are 2 or 3 years old, and or a bunch of other AV stuff that we got in as samples to test and play with and turn it over to schools. Schools will find a use for it. So you could even talk to your local schools, or you can talk to your local DeVry or technical institute and find out what they might be interested in taking off your hands. So you don't have to have a sophisticated program where you've got a relationship with GER. You can actually set up a donation program. And again, in the meantime, all things being equal, I promise you the greener AV system will win. We've seen that time and time again. So if you want a copy of this presentation, you can go to ravepubs.com/green, or you can scan that code right there, and that will give you access to this presentation. We have it in PDF format where you can download, in addition to all the documentation I've spoken about, the lead information, the information on the STEP program, information on the actual government initiatives that exist right now. They're all on that site. So in the